Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Olivia Daniels. I am the Unit Coordinator for Introduction to Forensic Science. Today's topic, we are going to go over assessing the crime scene. Now, rather than me present the information, what I would like you to do is introduce Senior Sergeant Adrian Brock, and Adrian's going to talk us through the procedures. And, well, without further ado, I'm going to ask Adrian the first question here. We've got our little cheat sheets, if you're wondering. Okay, now we've got our crime scene behind us there, and basically, who enters the crime scene first?
Yeah, look, that's a good question. Obviously, crime scene, from a police aspect, our priorities are property and preservation of life. So our first response police officers who actually get to the scene first to actually deal with any incident or altercation are the first people that actually enter into the scene. And what they do is actually determine whether there's any loss of life in that scene or whether there's any loss of property that we need to actually go in and investigate and examine at a higher level. As far as forensic officers, when we arrive at our scene, we've generally got those first responders who have actually cordoned off an area or potentially identified an area of consideration. And then the forensic officers will actually go in. Generally, in the police, we have a three-tiered system where we'll have our scenes of crime officers who are our photographers and general volume crime guys that will actually go to the scene and determine whether they need to bring in more of an expert level to actually examine it. And those expert levels may mean the scientific officers who do a little bit more analytical side of things, and or some experts down in Brisbane in respects to, say, ballistics or fingerprints and various things like that. So generally, first responders, of course, to start with, and then our low-level volume crime scenes crime officers will go in and determine whether we have to ramp it up.
Excellent. So who actually declares it a crime scene? Is it those first responding officers, or...?
Look, generally, basically the first responders have what's called a district duty officer. Now the district duty officer is about senior sergeant level in the regional areas, can be an inspector down in the Brisbane metropolitan areas. The district duty officer is the one that generally declares it a crime scene. However, every police officer has the responsibility, if they've identified either loss of life or loss of property, to be able to secure that scene. They can declare it as a crime scene, and that gives us various powers then to be able to hold that crime scene until we can conduct further investigations to determine what the circumstances are around the incident.
Right. Well, I'm sure that we've all seen these CSI programs and things like that, and usually there's about 100 people contaminating a crime scene. In real life, how many people roughly would be allowed at the crime scene? I mean, is it like you see it in those TV shows where everybody seems to be walking around a crime scene?
Well, look, to answer that question is how long is a piece of string, really? Yeah. Yes, I know the shows you're talking about, yeah. The CSI in America, and a lot of our protocols and methodologies are very similar to those CSI programs. However, we try and control as much as we can how many personnel go into a crime scene. Obviously, as I mentioned before, the first responders determine whether there's a loss of life or property. From that point, the forensic officers, when they arrive on the scene, in our operational procedural manual, we have the right then to control that crime scene. Now, generally, forensics will lock everybody out of that crime scene. We will determine a suitable size of the cordon, and then we will work about recording any information of anybody that goes in and out of that crime scene. So, look, on a minor crime, such as a break and enter or something along those lines, you may only have one forensic officer enter into the scene. On a major crime, you're looking at a minimum of 2 to 3 scenes of crime officers, maybe 2 scientific officers, maybe 2 to 3 fingerprint experts, maybe a forensic coordinator, maybe 2 to 3 photographers coming up from Brisbane. If it's a ballistics job, then you'd be looking at probably 2 to 3 ballistics officers going in there as well. So, as you can see, the amount of persons that are involved in a major crime exponentially outweigh what a minor crime is.
Yeah, so it's not the one person does it all as you see in the sometimes in these shows, there's always just that one forensic scientist that does absolutely everything, and in real life that's not the case at all.
No, and look, and that's correct. In the CSI programs, they are, as per the name, crime scene investigators. Here in Queensland, we work along the lines of crime scene examiners, and we're only a small part of the entire major investigation. And we have a criminal investigative branch that actually deals with the investigation itself, and we provide our intelligence and our knowledge back to those investigators, and they're the ones that determine the course of the investigation.
Excellent. Okay, now, on entering a crime scene, is there a system as to how you would process it? Or do you just go in there and look around, or...?
Look, there is. The process that we generally take is we obviously need to establish as much information as possible, but without actually influencing our forensic examiners whilst they're in the scene. The process that the Queensland Police Service takes with their protocols at the moment is the first forensic officer on scene will generally go in and get a visual of what they have to deal with so that they can actually liaise with the forensic coordinator to determine what level of investigations we need to conduct, or examinations I should say, that we need to conduct inside that scene. From that point, we'll obviously try, as a forensic coordinator, which is my role, I arrive and I would discuss with all the investigators there at the scene, potentially have a chat to the witnesses, and if an offender or a suspect's there, I try and obtain as much information from them as possible, if they're willing. And from that aspect, what we would do is sit down and devise a plan. We would then look at all the risk associated with that plan and whether we could go about the plan successfully. Obviously, once we've established it as a crime scene, we have to now think of that as a workplace. And so we have to apply all the occupational health and safety issues that are associated with a workplace. From there, once we've devised a plan, we would run that past the investigators, make sure that they're happy with that plan, and then we would then brief our forensic experts and forensic examiners, and off they would go and basically go about what that plan is.
What type of risks would you be looking at, or just roughly?
Yeah, no, look, there are numerous amounts of risks. It obviously depends on the crime scene that we're dealing with. Fires are slightly different to dead bodies, but obviously there's a biological risk with dead bodies, and blood exposure to blood, semen, bodily fluids and various things like that. There's a physical risk with any scene, tripping, falling through holes, which reminds me of a job that we just did lately where we had to remove all the manholes off the ground to get a team up underneath into the sewerage pipes. And as a consequence, we had all these holes where people could fall down, just bystanders walking past. So we had to make sure that there was suitable safety around those. Chemical hazards, of course, gases, water, various things like that, explosions. We've also got hazards such as radiological hazards and various other things. So.
And how do you deal with them if you do find a hazard? I know it's, again, how long is a piece of string? But for instance, if there was some explosives or something that's potentially very flammable, is there a particular way you would deal with it? Or?
Yeah, look, there is. We have a form that we have to fill out as part of our protocols, and in that form it's basically a quick check to make sure that we're covering all the safety aspects of it. The form doesn't so much give us ways about dealing with it, but at least allows us to identify the risk. Once we've identified the risk, then we would consider the MSDSs that's just associated with that risk, whether we actually need to go ahead with a forensic examination associated with that risk, or whether we can just simply avoid that area or not deal with that side of things at the moment. You know, it's a consultative approach to the way we go about our business, and it's important that we bring the investigators in on it and let them know, look, this is a risk, do we need to do this, and are we going to actually probatively add to your investigation, or is it just a waste of time? So, you know, each risk is dealt with separately, and each risk has to be dealt with before we can actually move forward.
All right, you spoke about taping off an area, are we talking about just, say, if it was a murder scene, are you talking about just where the body's at, or does it involve a larger area?
No, look, definitely involves a larger area.
Yeah.
The taping off of the body is way too small. Like, we generally take the adage of take as much ground as you can and then reduce that as you need, because you can generally not increase. You know, you've got to remember that major crime scenes do attract a lot of attention, either from the media or from bystanders or from police or other agencies that are there, whether it's a dead body or whether it's a fire. Or whether it's a chemical radiological car crash on the side of the road or something along those lines. So we like to take as much as we can first, set up our cordons and our boundaries and declare that the crime scene. I like to ultimately at a major crime scene have an outer cordon, which is where we can actually control the public, the media and all other agencies that are coming and getting involved. And then we have inside that what we call the inner cordon. Now, the inner cordon is where the actual forensic officers are recorded actually entering into, so that we can keep control of the amount of people that are going in and out of that, the traffic over that line. Now, in between the inner and outer cordon, I like to set up what we call the police forward command, which is where myself as a forensic coordinator or the forensic examiners can actually come out and have a bit of a rest, not be bothered by the public and the media, but still have a rest from actually working inside the crime scene.
Can it involve more than one crime, more than one area, as in crime scene?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. I've had crime scenes that are involved across 4 to 5 streets. I've had crime scenes that are about 2.5 k's long. I've had crime scene in one area and then a crime scene in another area. And as you can imagine, to set up guards on these various different crime scenes can be quite draining on the resources.
Yeah.
However, we must maintain those guards until we can actually say that we've finalised with that crime scene.
Oh, excellent.